celebration.
We are live.
Versus, August and September and January was one of the dates of
I want one of these.
and things shifted
I
into
gotta write a grant.
January because January first was Coronation. September was when it was.
So, anybody watching from home, thank you so much for joining us here at the West Des Moines Historical Society. We are live here at the Historic Jordan House Museum. Oh, I made everybody be quiet. I didn't mean to do that.
When Vic talks, people listen.
That's scary. My name is Gail Brubaker. I'm the Executive Director for the West Des Moines Historical Society. And we are so thrilled to be partnering with Audrey Kennis in the city of West Des Moines on this very important conversation of the history of African Americans in Iowa, where we've been and where we're going. So we have some extremely esteemed, fascinating, qualified, awesome, I'm running out of pejoratives, panel members to talk today. So if you have any questions, please feel free to put them in the chat and I will make sure we get to them. So Audrey is still interviewing people, so why don't, or talking to folks, so why don't we start off with you three introducing yourselves, or I'll go yell at Audrey.
Here comes our next panel.
Okay, wonderful. So if anybody is not familiar, the Jordan House, which is at 2001 Fuller Road, is important for a lot of reasons. It is the home of James Jordan, who was one of the very first permanent European settlers here in the state. Obviously, there were plenty of indigenous people that were here before, but he was the first one to really make it his full-time home and permanent home. Mr. Jordan was a state senator. He served in the House of Representatives. He was a Polk County supervisor, but he is most well known for being the chief conductor for the Underground Railroad here in Polk County. So when you come and visit the Jordan House, which you can on Fridays and Sundays at 11 a.m. and 1 p.m., you will be walking actually in the footsteps of history. That radical abolitionist, John Brown, was here at least twice with groups of freedom seekers that he was escorting to Canada. So it is really a gem that we have here in our community, and this is part of our mission, to educate and outreach. So please like our Facebook page, check out our website, wdmhs.org. We have a lot of things coming up for all ages, including a schoolhouse story time next Tuesday and social justice Saturdays, so which are free tours that we'll be having here from 1 to 3 on the second Saturday of each month, and partnering with an organization in our community that focuses on social justice. So in July, we'll be talking about the fact that slavery is not dead, that there's still a lot of slavery in this world, and working with an organization that helps women and children who are victims of modern day enslavement. So you can come and talk to those representatives. So no further ado, I would like to introduce Audrey Kennis, who is the City of West Des Moines DEI Director and a phenom herself. So.
Yes. The folks who took their time out of today to welcome us and give us some wonderful insight. So first, I want to thank you all and have you all start by introducing yourself. So we're going to start with our panel, again, of community leaders who have been very engaged in a multitude of ways here in West Des Moines, but really the broader Des Moines area. And before I jump in, I do want to acknowledge someone who's really been behind a lot of the initiatives and make sure we not just keep Juneteenth alive here in West Des Moines, but really throughout the state. And that is Ms. Dwana. So, no, you're fine. So, and again, we appreciate you taking time, because I know for the past 3-4 weeks, nonstop, she's been at event after event after event. But again, it demonstrates her commitment to the community, but also preserving the history of Black or African Americans, not just here in our community, but really broadly in all communities, because this is the story of America. This is not relegated to just one group or one demographic. This is all our story that we should celebrate together. So with that said, I'm going to have our panelists introduce themselves, tell us your name, your affiliation, or what organization you're with, a brief tidbit, and then we'll start with our questions. And at the end, we will then turn it over to guests to be able to ask any questions you may have. Okay, we'll start with you, Aaron.
Well, hello, my name is Aaron Kahn II. I use he, him, his pronouns. I am the Diversity, Equity, Inclusion intern for Audrey at the City of West Des Moines. I'm also the chair of Drake Democrats at Drake University. I'm a rising senior, majoring in politics and strategic local communications. Dream one day be president of the United States. But until then, I really want to focus on finding ways to make an impact on West Des Moines and my surrounding community, empower the youth, and make sure that Black people keep their voice.
I'm Dwana Bradley, General Chairperson of Iowa Juneteenth. Voice is half gone, so I'll do my best to be as loud as I can. I also serve on school board for Des Moines Public Schools and have my own media company, I Work with Media, which focuses on telling our stories and making sure that our stories are told in a way that is different than what mainstream media chooses to tell our stories. And as I've grown over the years, I've become a huge advocate of Juneteenth and just Black history in general. My goal is to go across the state of Iowa to make sure that every city is acknowledging Juneteenth in some way, shape, or form. And I do that through safe conversations. I know a lot of people are tired of having conversations. I am not one of them. I believe it is my purpose in life to go into spaces with people who don't look like me necessarily, to have those conversations and force them to understand why their advocacy is important, because we need to have systemic changes take place for people who look like me still in 2023. So I consider it my purpose and my mission to travel around the state, and I will continue to do that with or without the funding or the resources, because it means that much to me to make sure that we are not ashamed to talk about history. It is a part of our past. It was an ugly past, but we should not be afraid or ashamed to have those courageous conversations, because we are responsible for making sure that history is not repeated. So,
my name is Al Womble, and I am the political director for the Iowa Federation of Labor, AFL-CIO. I am also the chair of the Iowa Black Caucus. And this is an extremely exciting event for me because I'm a giant nerd. I love history, and I have teamed up, fortunately, with West Des Moines City Council and with Audrey to give a couple different presentations this year already on Black history. I'm looking forward to giving another presentation on the desegregation of the United States military, and another presentation I'm going to be giving on August 6th on the 58th anniversary of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. So it's something that for me is very deep in my bones, because the problem I sometimes face when it comes to Black history is that we're taught anything about it except for Martin Luther King. And even if people say, well, okay, well, who was it that sat on the bus that helped desegregate the bus? And somebody goes, oh, that must have been Martina Luther King. And it's like, oh. So this is why it is so extraordinarily important to me. And there is a couple particular women that I want to make sure that I mention later on. One I'm very excited about, so I hope Audrey gives me a chance to talk about that. But I don't want to give away too much right now, but history is very important, because not only does it tell us, where we've been, what is our roots, but how far have we come and how much farther do we need to go. And so I'm really happy for this, and if anyone would like to talk to me about Black history after this, or if anybody would like me to talk about one of my presentations and see if you have a group that might be interested, all of my presentations are very nonpartisan, with the exception that I will tell you that the Packers stink, because I'm a Chicago Bears fan. But yes, go Bears. So just thank you for being here.
Because we just made history. My name is Dr. Vicky Longhill. I'm an attorney here in town. I'm the director of the Eddie Davis Community Center, a member of Zeta Phi Beta Sorority Incorporated. And here I'm a lifelong resident of West Des Moines. My family have been here over 100 years. So on June 5th, you're gay, right? So on June 5th, I want to just congratulations to everyone who joined into the city council persons, Miss Audrey Kennis, for making it happen. The street was named in honor of my mother and father, who were be glad to be here. That's history for West Des Moines. That we can always celebrate.
And it's a living history, so ask her about her family.
Yes.
Because the biggest problem, and I don't mean to interrupt, is
Yeah, you
But
better
the-
get us
the-
on notes.
the biggest problem with history is we always think to ask people about it after they're gone. So, talk to her.
Right now, I appreciate that, that's real. Okay, you all, so we're gonna get started with just the questions, and again, we wanna leave a little time for those in the audience to be able to ask questions at the end. And our first question really is, as we talk about the history, right? Because sometimes we jump to the present. What were some key milestones in the progress of African Americans in Iowa throughout history? So any of you are welcome to tackle or address that. I know Al, you're ready.
Yes.
So everyone's going.
You know what? I don't have to say a word. We're gonna refer to Al for this one.
You know, before you do that.
And I'll chime in after Al, so you kick us off with this question.
Okay, so I'm very excited about this because there's some really important milestones that have happened here in Iowa as it regards to United States history. You know, back in 1868, there was a small young black woman named Susan Clark, who was responsible for being the first student in the entire United States to desegregate her school, Muscatine number 2, because her father challenged segregation in the Iowa Supreme Court, and the Iowa Supreme Court said that no, desegregation is not legal. This happened 87 years before the Brown versus Board of Education decision, and it happened just after the 13th Amendment, which made slavery illegal, and just before the 14th Amendment, which allowed equal protection for all citizens, and before the 15th Amendment, which then actually allowed everybody the right to vote. And Iowa was even before that when it came to equality and the right to vote, at least for men, because in 1870, the Iowa legislature removed the term white from voting rights, which then allowed every male within the state of Iowa to vote. So we were truly ahead of the time. We were also ahead of the time thanks to a young woman named Edna Griffin, who in 1948 went into Cat's drugstore and desegregated that place by sitting down at a white counter and then challenging it before the Iowa Supreme Court. This was 7 years before Rosa Parks and her famous sitting down on the bus and refusing to move. So we have, again, been at the head of the curve when it comes to civil rights movements. Now, we still have a long way to go. There is just one other person that I want to be able to mention at this point, and that is the name, and I hope all of you really, really remember this name. And I want to have some discussions with some folks in here about that afterwards, and that is the name Charity Adams. Charity Adams was the first black woman who was commissioned as an officer in the United States Army. And she eventually retired as a lieutenant colonel in the United States Army. And she did her introductory work right here at Fort Des Moines, here in Iowa. And one of the things I love about her, and I'll just tell this quick story, then I'll be quiet. But she was once challenged by a general when she was over commanding a battalion over in Europe during World War II. And he said to her, you know, Adams, I'm going to come in here and I'm going to have a first lieutenant, a white first male lieutenant, show you how to do your job. Now, she was a major, and a major outranks a lieutenant. And he was challenging her in front of her entire battalion. And she thought very hard and very carefully about how to respond to this general, because she could have been court-martialed. She could have been arrested. But she also realized she was being challenged by her authority in front of her entire battalion. So she turned around, looked him dead in the eyes, and we said, I'm going to have a white first male lieutenant come in here and show you how to do your job. She looked him dead in the eyes and said, over my dead body you will. So that is the type of fierceness that we see that comes out of Black history here in the state of Iowa and developed from her time here at Fort Des Moines. And I see a lot of other people, including my friend Rochelle, my friend Ross Wilburn, my friend T.R. Mays, who continue to carry on that tradition. And I think we should be very proud of that.
Thank you. Thank you. So our second question is, how did the Great Migration impact African American communities here in Iowa? I would say we had a couple folks could probably speak to that history directly.
Okay. I would say the migration came in different forms and in different communities. So my forefathers, they came with the railroad, and they were traveling throughout the country working on the railroad. And as they came to the Valley Junction area, they came as replacement workers because the railroad, I think it was Rock Island at the time, was on strike. I have other family members, which was would have been my great uncle. He continued working on the railroad, and he eventually settled in Manly, Iowa, which is right near Mason City. But we have the railroad, we have migration with the railroad. We also have migration with Buxton. In Buxton, Iowa, the lower south part, what is that, southeast part of Iowa, that was a mining community. But then you had Keosauqua, I think they refer to it as Keokuk and Ottumwa. So you had mining communities, you had railroad communities, you had different type of industries where the Great Migration did come through. As time went on, then you had industries such as the steel. We went through our industrial age, right? So such as the steel industries, here in Des Moines, you have Pittsburgh Steel, but industries such as Firestone and Armstrong, and then go north to Detroit, where you had the automobile industry. So I believe that was a major part of the migration of African American, because majority of the workers were minorities, African Americans, and they took advantage of that opportunity.
And Dr. Vicky referenced the strike, and so there was a strike that was happening specifically here in Valley Junction at the time. And so that was what brought in a lot of African Americans, and you would see it across the country. There were strikes happening in other parts all throughout the country as a lot of folks were trying to unionize, and so there was a lot of turmoil within a lot of the manufacturing industries. And so in order to break a lot of that up, they would bring in a lot of African Americans or Mexican Americans. And so you've seen this influx of specifically African Americans coming into spaces where they probably weren't often inhabiting. And so it created a really unique blend of culture and experiences, which we have to this day here in West Des Moines, which is really cool. Thank you. Anyone else have anything to add? Are we good there? So we'll go on to the next, because we have quite a few. Do we have a question?
Yeah,
Oh,
so,
go ahead.
so you're saying that the blacks who came into these business during the strikes, they essentially were being hired as strike breaker? Yeah.
They were in a lot of places, which caused a lot of conflict in a lot of cities across the country. And so this also contributed to some of the riots that we've seen that would happen, and a lot of racialized terror. And so it did create a lot of infighting, but I think people also at some point had to kind of step back and say, well, how do we learn to live together and work together? And so over time it subsided, but it did create a lot of turmoil in some places, because you had people coming in working at a lower wage and were then able to surpass some of the unionization methods that a lot of the workers were trying to mobilize. So,
Yeah, and in particular, during that time, I have the history on the National Bar Association, which is the Association of African American Lawyers, Judges, Professors, Students. But during that time, well, it was founded in 1925 here in Des Moines by 5 African American attorneys who were denied admission to the American Bar Association. But during that time, you hear the stories. That's why someone said it's important to tell the stories. Mm-hmm. That's how it gets handed down. Mm-hmm. But during that time, you had hate going on to the extent that the Ku Klux Klan marched in throughout Polk County, Des Moines, and even down Fifth Street of West Des Moines in 1925. Yeah, it's in our city that has the history. So, you know, and I wondered when I seen that picture, I was sitting on a committee and we was going through the history. I had never seen that picture. When I seen it, I'm like, 1925, what? Nothing else, no story but the picture. So I'm like, what was going on that would cause that? And so that was the time that the migration of the workers came in. Because even though my grandfather came in 1921, on or about that, workers continued coming in. So I'm thinking that must have been part of the rebellion, because some of the workers at that time lived in the upper rooms or the apartments in the buildings above Fifth Street, and particularly the building on the northwest corner of Fifth and Railroad. I just want to, if I may, just acknowledge and recognize my sister, Rachel Long, who is the CEO of the Taste of the Sun. But her organization is specifically in the preservation of our history here in Valley Junction. And you need to check out her link and website on the many stories that have been conducted in the events. I think she just celebrated 10 years last year. And find out more about the diverse culture and cuisine of Valley Junction.
Thank you all. So let me transition, we're going to speed this up to current day. What is the current state of Black America and how much progress have we made in 158 years? And what are some of the ongoing challenges that you perceive? And I'll start with someone we haven't heard from. Thank you.
I'll just start a little bit and scale a little bit back. You know, from a Juneteenth perspective, one of the things that I find interesting about Iowa, and I always talk about this when I talk to people about Juneteenth, is that we've shifted and evolved over the years. So we started out with Albia and Muscatine being places that you wouldn't think of having their Emancipation Day and Freedom Day celebrations. A lot of those celebrations you'll hear are referred to as Emancipation Day and Freedom Day celebrations that took place in January, August, and September. We've shifted since then. And then there was a moment in time where there wasn't a lot of celebrating going on. Now we've shifted more into having more of these celebrations. And so for me, it's like same song, different verse. Like things have changed, but things haven't changed. You know, when we're still talking about the fact that in every subject that you're talking about, health, education, every time it's for people like me, we're talking about we're at the bottom of the totem pole. And so for me, we can say things have changed, you know, can I go out there and own my own business? Yeah, but is it hard for me to get the business loan? Absolutely. You know, can I go out there and go get all the degrees I want to go get? I absolutely can. But am I still recognized for that? Absolutely not. Someone's always questioning the credentials. So we can say that things have changed and they have somewhat. Am I have the right to own my own things? Of course I do. Do I have the right to go out there and do things? I can. But am I still being watched? Yes, I am. Am I still able to ride in my car without the police stopping me for some random thing like my light being out on my license plate? Yes, it's happening. So I feel like we've just changed things and modernized it, but we haven't really gotten away from things happening. When we live in a state that more people are in jail and incarcerated that look like me than inhabit the state. Like that's just absolutely crazy. We're still dealing in a place where we're still talking about Black males that we're focusing on in Des Moines to make sure that they're getting their education. And my dad's 65 and he's like, y'all still talking about that? He's at 65, he's asking me, are we still talking about that? And we are. So we haven't figured things out yet. And what we do is we give a lot of speak to it. We write a lot of proclamations. We put a lot of things on paper that say we're going to do better, but our actions stink. Our actions are not showing that we want to move anything forward. And I think for me, that's the part I struggle with, is to do all of this work as all of us do here, and to share all of this history we share. I don't know if it's getting into the right ears, because we still seem to keep pushing against those in power who want to silence us. in 2023. You're telling me what I can and can't say about history. You're telling teachers in schools that they have to say certain things. We now have to be creative in how we talk to our kids about history. We have books that we can't read anymore because now they're threatening. So for me, like 158 years, yeah, it might look different. It doesn't feel different. And that's the part that I'm struggling with right now, is it doesn't feel like things are different for people like me. And so we got to continue to push those who don't look like me to be advocates for us. And that's happened all across history. When you see things change, it changed because people who didn't look like us came up on the scene and they took that on and said, I'm going to speak up for you. And that's what we need now. We need people to be our allies and our advocates to help us. But I will tell you, for me, I know change is going to come. I have to keep telling myself that and seep it into my spirit. But it feels so challenging at times because we're still talking about the bottom of women dying during pregnancy, just because they want to have babies or dying in the hospital, not having health insurance for people. Or just even, my daughter said to me, Mom, why is Trader Joe's all the way out in West Des Moines? Like, how come we can't have something closer to us? Like, the access to things is just ridiculous. And then we're taking things away and we're pushing them out further and we're making it harder for people to do things. Why is it so hard to lose weight, for example? And I went to one place, and I'm getting off topic, but these kinds of things irritate me to no end. I went to a place to go because I need to lose weight. My thing. And I went to go ask for help to do that. And when I got to the place, the amount they wanted to charge me just to be able to lose weight. And I'm thinking, well, you're not targeting nobody like me. They wanted me to pay for the food. They wanted me to pay for, and they have the scientific facts that show me how to get it done. But I've got to pay thousands of dollars to be able to make it happen. And it's those kinds of things that I said, well, I guess I'm just going to keep doing what I do. I'll keep walking and doing all this. But those are the things that become irritating. It's that access. It's not being able to have the same things that others have, but we say we've come a long ways. We still have a long ways to go. And so for me, it just feels like things have shifted somewhat, but it just looks different. It's still the same thing. It just looks different. And we're fooling each other to think that change has really happened, and change really has not. It just looks different. So now you're telling me I can go get that, I can be my own business owner, but you ain't doing nothing to support me. And I keep going back to that because I'm looking at a business owner right here, and it is challenging for us as business owners to have what we want, because you're saying, I'll give you this, I'll give you that, I'll give you that, but you're really not giving us anything. We are struggling to survive, and that's why most of our Black-owned businesses are gone in 3 to 5 years, because they're not being poured into. So I just feel like we're not there yet. We can get there if people will start listening. But my concern is people are turning a deaf ear because we're getting people in power. And I hate using the whole Democrat-Republican thing. I tried to stay away from both because everyone has issues. But when we have the majority in power who continues to turn us off, in Iowa, we have got a serious issue. And if we, the people, do not start taking that back, going up to the state capitol, going into spaces, starting to come together, we can make a change. But we as the people have come really complacent, and we've become okay with the things, we get a little crumbs and we feel good about it. Oh, that's good enough for me, I'll take that. I want the whole daggone pie and then some. And we gotta figure out how to make that happen. But it happens with us collectively working together and quit putting ourselves in silos where we're trying to do it all by ourselves. I can't do it by myself, but I can do it with 100 of y'all in the room going down to Des Moines Public Schools with me and saying, we need something to happen. We've gotten away from that. And so that's what's challenging for me, is we're putting the pressures on one person to do the work, and it takes a collective effort. And that's the part that's disheartening for me, is we want to make one person responsible for our change, and it takes a community to make that change happen. So I'll stop because this is my
If I may, when you started talking about the incarceration rates, and it's actually, we're the third in the country.
In the nation.
In the nation, that's right, for the incarceration of African Americans. And then when you look at our percentage in the population,
Less than
maybe,
5%.
yeah, but we represent 28 and 30% in the prison system. Now, we have had, I would say, it started in 1990 Supreme Court Commission, Iowa. report. And it came out that there is discrimination from the time the person is stopped, the charge that is brought against them, because after all, it is the police that recommends the charge to the county attorney, review it and accept it. And then now let's try to, and you're going to jail. You don't have to go to jail on all offenses, but, primarily higher percentage are going to jail. Can you bail out? Or you might stay a couple of days. Maybe you'll bail, most of the times you don't. And it showed that it went through the whole system, all the way to the trial, pre-trial, mediation, into the prison guards treatment, and the whole staff. Now, that was the Iowa Supreme Court's task force. Now, in 97, they did another report, same thing. Same thing. And again, another report, so you're right. We know this, but we're not doing. I have a problem, and it disturbs me, if I may speak about this. Iowa has a 3 strikes you're out rule. That means if any individual gets 3 felony charges, then after the 3rd charge, your sentencing is enhanced by 15 years. So that felony charge, say the 3rd felony charge, 2nd degree theft, that felony charge may only carry 3 to 5 years. But they put the 15 years enhancement on it. So now you got a sentence of 20 years. And again, it's the police officer's discretion in saying what the offense is. I've sit in on courts and hearings where you have a misdemeanor offense, driving without the consent of an owner. It's a misdemeanor. But it turns into 2nd degree theft. Now you've stole somebody's car. You have to have that person come in court and say, no, I said they can drive it, etc. But you still have that 2nd degree theft that came up as a felony. We'll drop it. But that 15-year enhancement is still there. So that is really tough. And I reviewed that law throughout the country. You have some states who are actually getting rid of it. You have, it came in with the Clinton administration. You have some states that put a sunset on it, only for 3 years. You have some states that says, okay, after the 3rd, we'll drop off all of the offenses and start all over. But Iowa's not that way. It stays there. So, again, when we look at the incarceration and wonder why, we know why it's just.
I just want to add one thing that very quickly.
Okay.
I can see when we talk about some of this, I can see some people in the room clench up a little bit. So I just want to remind y'all that when you hear about this and you're having that feeling, that means that you recognize something is wrong with this. This means that you're a human being and you see something that's being done to other human beings that's wrong. So don't internalize it and say, man, they're picking on me. What you need to say is, how do we make this better? How do I work with one of these leaders up here or one of the leaders in this room and make it better?
Aaron.
Yes.
Oh, no, it's
Yeah,
okay.
yeah,
Yes, help us, guys.
Well, no, we can move on to the next.
No, you got it.
Okay, no, I get it.
Something to add.
Well, I just wanted to add on to the topic about incarceration because I think genuinely this is one of the biggest issues. We're fighting it's not invisible, we're fighting a war. We call it the war on drugs. It's a war on people of color. It's a war on Black people is what it really is. And not only is it a pipeline to send young Black, especially men, but young Black people in general to prison, but also send them to slavery. The government makes so much money off of the labor that prisoners do because they can pay them pennies, nickels, legally. That's what's allowed in the Constitution, that slavery's abolished, except if you're incarcerated. And so I think the biggest issue is how it's just all the propaganda that we have around drug usage and gang violence and stuff, when really Black and white people, statistics show, do drugs about at the same rate. But I know white boys that were doing coke in Valley never saw a cop in their life, but I have so many of my close friends at Valley that had their lives ruined because they had a gram of marijuana on them. They're at the wrong place at the wrong time. So I think, again, incarceration is a very, very big issue that I don't know why we don't focus on more in Iowa. This isn't a national issue. This is an issue every single state, including ours.
I'm gonna say this and leave it alone. The collateral effect that it has on the whole family.
Yes.
Leave it alone, think about the ones, and you have single parents and you have children without, absent parents at home.
Prison industrial complex, right? We talk about that, what that means for us as a country, which is something we really have to grapple with. But as we talk about those social determinants of health, right? Incarceration of individuals, as well as health disparities, wealth disparities, educational disparities. You look at any category, right? There is a disproportionality when it comes to African Americans. And we have to start having these real conversations of, one, why? Because oftentimes we'll attribute it to culture. It's not culture. These things are not cultural, but we'll say, oh, that's just a cultural thing of what they do. No, it's not a cultural thing, right? This is systemic, but it's also a byproduct of intentional policies and historical trauma. And we have to start thinking of how they show up and continue to perpetuate. So unless we take a real proactive stance, things will continue to be the way they are. And it's by design. So something for us to kind of mull on. Okay. So next question. We've seen a decline in civic engagement and voter turnout. Why has this occurred, and how do we re-engage the Black community in reclaiming the vote? Before I turn it to you all, hopefully many of you have been paying attention to the recent Supreme Court. What was the word? Help me. Right. The decision. That's the word. Decision. That was talking about gerrymandering in Alabama. Let me get it right. So again, we think of these things as being, of the past, right? This is still currently happening present day. And there wasn't a lot of conversation, which is really surprising, right? When that is one of our basic fundamental rights, constitutional rights, where we see it intentionally being undermined, specifically targeting the Black vote. So how do we re-engage Black voters and Black community in reclaiming the vote? I'll turn that over to you all. I'm gonna ask if you can keep your comments to 2 minutes.
So, voter registration is something that's really big for me. I've literally been in several different cities throughout this state doing voter registration. I also want to point out, I have my good friend, Dr. Vote, John Olson right here, who is one of the greatest voting experts when it comes to voter registration. So there's a couple different things that I will point out, and I'll try to keep this short. Number one, I can literally point to you in a couple different cities, block by block, where there is an absolute absence of voter engagement from either party, from any candidate whatsoever. Like, I grew up in Davenport, Iowa. I can literally lay out for you block by block where there is absolute, and my brother over here knows what I'm talking about because he's also from Davenport. Right. Didn't go as good as high school as me, but and that is part of the problem. There needs to be voter engagement there, and people forget voter registration and voter information. And I don't like to call it education, because that means somebody's uneducated. No, they're not informed. So voter education and voter information is a nonpartisan thing, and we should all do that. Why? Because our society is better when people vote. It has been proven that people's recidivism, as far as returning back to jail after they've committed a crime, drops by 7.9% if they then are registered to vote and become an active voter. So wouldn't we want to make sure that people are registered to vote and go out and vote, and then that prevents them from becoming a recidivist again? One of the other problems is that people, I hate to say this, but there are also these neighborhoods that have a lack of voter participation, are the same neighborhoods where these people have seen nothing change for their grandfathers, their fathers, or for them. And so they're like, why should I vote? Why does it matter? Nothing ever changes. Doesn't matter who's in office. Now, I will make one caveat though, and some people agree with me, some people disagree with me. I have lived in Davenport, Des Moines, Iowa City, Cedar Rapids, Urbandale, and now in West Des Moines. I would like to say that West Des Moines, I personally feel does a better job at this than all those other cities that I have personally lived in. And so I will say that we are doing a great job, but that's because of some of the activists here in this room, but we can do so much better. There's still, and you know, there are areas where we don't have voter engagement and we need to. You know, if not for the fact that we're letting citizens express their voice and be able to say, this is what I want my future to be, but also to look, say that when people participate, crime and all the other things that follow from that drop. Isn't that what we want? People participating in their democracy, and not only that, going out and talking to our constituents, to the people who are out there. We should. And God willing, I will literally drag our city councilmen and people by their ears before some of these communities if I have to. And I'm a pretty big dude, so I might think be able to do it. So, but anyway,
Violence is not endorsed in here. We're not putting our hands on anyone.
that's what my wife keeps telling
Yeah,
me.
but listen, but Al is very persuasive. He'll get you there.
I would like to see us start earlier. I think we need to make the word vote something that's in our kids' language young. Not waiting until they get in high school, and I'm guilty of this even with my own son, and saying, you need to register to vote, you need to register to vote. Well, now he's 17, we're having this conversation. We should have been having that conversation when he was 4 and 5 and 6. Our young people now, little kids couldn't show us how to use cell phones. We can start talking to them about voting. They can hop on their little TikTok and all these other things at 3 and 4 years old. We need to start talking to them about voting and what that means. And I think that we need to interject the word voting in all spaces. What we do is we wait for the proper place to have those conversations. We need to have those in our churches. We need to have them in our homes. We need to have them at school, starting with preschool on up. And it will take the concerted effort. But I think when we start putting things in people's ears when they're younger and getting them used to having those conversations. But what we do is we say, oh, we're not going to touch that because it's not the place where we have those conversations. Voting is the place where we have all of those conversations, so we can start raising young people to know that when they turn 17, like my daughter at 7, she's like, oh, I can't wait to go register to vote. My son was like, I registered to vote at 17 and I just can't wait till I turn 18. That's the excitement that we have to start putting in our kids, but it starts younger. And I think, and that's everything, not just voting, but we need to start instilling those things in them when they're young so they can be ready to go to the polls and bring them a part of what we do. Let them come with us and see those kinds of things. But to me, I just think sometimes we wait until it gets late or we come to certain events and say, hey, let's get you signed up to vote. I think our young people are disengaged because they don't see where they fit into all of this. They're trying to figure out where's my place in this. So these seem like old people problems. This don't seem like it's a my person problem. Why does I'm saying this is what they say. I don't call people old. I don't like that. I call people mature. I say you're mature. You're mature. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, I don't call you old, but I'm just saying, you know, my kids still use the word. So I'm just saying, you know, that's what they say. But I think we've got to let them realize they have a place in this. And I think that's where that disconnect comes because they don't feel like they're a part of this and they feel like it's our fight. No, it's all of our fight so that when you're getting, you know, older, the world will be a different place. So I think for me, I just come from the education standpoint of when they're getting them when they're younger.
Just one thing quick to add to that. Aaron, how old are you?
20.
Tiara, how old are you?
You don't have
Okay, so we got 20, my friend Tiara, and we got 18. So if we want young people to vote, y'all need to run for office.
Yeah.
And we need to encourage them to run for office and we need to get behind them with real volunteer work and money. So if we want you to vote and you to vote, we need you guys to run.
We need you to be the president.
That's right. That's right. I'm gonna come from a different perspective. I'm understanding and I agree with everything because that's the way to make it work. But everything doesn't work. We have a lot of dysfunctional families. So when I like the word informing, and I also believe in starting young. So to me, that's where it takes a village because you're going to be taught what is being taught or what you see. So let's just say, we know that there's plenty of families that are dysfunctional, children are not even with their family, or if they're with the second generation, grandmother, etc. But who's going to teach them? So maybe that's where it comes in, I don't know, your child care, your neighborhood. Now, my sister and I can attest to, we truly did grow up in a neighborhood where it took a village. I mean, every elder and person on that street had the authority and permission to talk to us and tell us what we can and can't do. I remember walking home because I misbehaved. I live on 11th. I misbehaved on 9th Street and got sent home. You know, you need to go home, whatever I did, playing baseball with kids and wasn't doing right. So I'm crying all the way home. And so then you'll see Granny Perkins, what are you crying for? You did what? Come here. All the way home,
Oh, yeah.
somebody's gonna stop and talk to you, you know? So I just said, we have a lot of youth, and especially in our community, that is coming up, but that information is not being shared. My working with youth, I've learned that we're teaching youth through our summer youth programs, through the schools, but when they go home, sometimes we need to be teaching the parents what we're teaching the youth too, so that it can be reinforced. So I'm just saying, as we're coming up and the younger generations are coming up, you know, I mean, if that's all you see, you don't do this.
Right.
Like you said, it's not, it has made a difference in our community, so they come up thinking it won't make a difference when they grow. So
That was deep, Dr.
Yeah.
Go ahead and ask a question
Yes,
that kind of talks to you earlier about incarceration. What are, this is ignorant of me, what are Iowa rules regarding when you can and can't vote? If you are incarcerated, when you get out, can you vote?
No.
So also that's,
no, the process gotten hard. I'm gonna let you speak on that. I worked on the process for 30 years.
okay.
Well, if you worked on it for 30 years, you got.
Listen, we don't have to get out later, one of y'all.
So-
I can explain.
I know John can, but when it comes to getting out of jail, essentially you have to, the most simple way to put it is you have to be off paper in order to be able to vote. That means you are no longer on parole or probation or something like that. You have to be off paper in order to be able to vote. Now, the unfortunate part about this is that it's just done through executive order, which means that an executive order has to be renewed. You know, it doesn't stand forever. And at any time, an executive order can also be repealed, you know, because it's done by the executive of the state. So they can issue it, they can repeal it whenever they want, and it's not permanent. If we want it to be permanent, it has to be an amendment to the state of Iowa Constitution, which hopefully that will happen. But right now, you know, I think there's also penalties in place that if you do register to vote and you're still on paper, that adds a charge to you. And in some cases, we'll actually have officers show up to your door with pistols to arrest you.
Wow.
Yes.
There was a young woman who was arrested, but they sent 4 officers to her home to arrest her, and all she had done was misunderstood the law and registered to vote. We should not be grabbing people with hordes of police officers just because they've registered to vote. There's far more serious crimes out there, like being a Packers fan. But that's essentially it.
And what you were saying, the executive orders
Yeah.
have changed.
Right.
So when I said I've worked on it for 30 years, because I'm gonna say it had to be pre-90s.
Mhm.
I used to work with, you know, individuals coming out of prison to fill out the application. That process went before the Iowa Parole Board
Mhm.
at that time. And the parole board would review it and they give the answer and decision. Then Vilsack, Governor Vilsack came in, and the executive order went forth that anyone, I think, 63 on that had any type of offense could now, Vilsack said, you can now register to vote. And all you had to do was go to the registration's office and register. You didn't have to do anything else. The day that Governor Branstad came into office, I got called into a judge's chambers. He said, what are we gonna do? I'm like, what's going on? Sit down, we're looking at TV. And his swearing in, within an hour of being sworn in, he revoked that executive order. Within an hour, and we're sitting there like, oh gosh, all the hard work we've done. And poor people. So what do you do now? Now you have to make application, and it goes to the governor's office for review. The governor will review it and either approve or deny. However, I think there's some disparate impact going on. One of the things you have to do is you have to have all your fines, court costs, and restitution paid. So when you're thinking about that incarceration, and people are being incarcerated, not only being incarcerated, but for long periods of time here in Iowa. I mean, it's unbelievable. So you're being charged every day for your state. Point being, I have worked with people who had $11,000 of restitution. You cannot vote until all your court costs and restitution is paid. However, you have individuals with misdemeanors, and they have outstanding court costs, and they're able to continue voting. So,
Because they're not voting.
If I could chime in, if we have
Go
the
ahead,
time for
Aaron.
it.
Yes, go ahead.
I think what we need to do is we need to cultivate a history of making change to our vote. We talk a lot about not seeing voting change things, and it's because for the most part, that's not how African Americans have made change. When I learned from my dad about the history of Black activism from Marcus Garvey, Malcolm X, Fred Hampton, we weren't talking about voting, we're talking about let's go out to protest. And then if they're not gonna give it to us, we'll make it ourselves. We'll make a free breakfast program. And because we have been excluded from the vote. And then, so I think what we saw was that when we finally fought and got the right to vote in America, there was a spike, but then that slowly decreased because again, we haven't had that institutionalization of the Black voice, the Black power. So I think through the Iowa Black Caucus and through grassroots efforts, we can start cultivating and make the history where we can finally see change through vote.
Thank you all, that was good. I'm gonna also add, after Reconstruction, or really during Reconstruction, we see a huge increase, right?
Yep.
And so we have to also, and I think you all spoke to it as well, and as we talk about that Supreme Court ruling, right? We also have to understand how there are powers at work that are trying to rescind our ability to vote as well, right? And so there is a consciousness, I think, that we have to re-engage, reinvigorate within ourselves to understand that voting is something that's always been near and dear to African Americans. We died. Many people have died, have been lynched to have the right to vote, something so simple that we take for granted. So it is very much ingrained in our historical story. But again, I think there's also this push to try now. You got the Voting Rights Act that was passed, and there were very intentional moves ever since to try to challenge and rescind those rights. And so we're always seeing this push and pull that's happening in our country, right? We talk about freedom. Freedom is not free. I think we take that for granted here. And so thank you for those comments. So I'm gonna move to we have time for like one more question, you all. This is the hard part. I'm gonna give us y'all have to keep to 2 minutes or we're stopping.
I'll stop.
Yeah, time is
Oh,
Time
I'm trying to wrap this up by 7. I wanna make sure, what time are we at, John?
You're at 6:30.
Okay, perfect. So how can community organization and grassroots movements contribute to the empowerment and advancement of African Americans, specifically here in Iowa? So that's question number 5.
Say that again.
How can community organizations and grassroots movements contribute to the empowerment and advancement of African Americans here?
I think,
Go ahead, Aaron, you start.
I think it's vital, especially for young people. I think after the murder of George Floyd, we saw many grassroots movements shoot up, especially the Black, no, not Black Lives Matter, Black Liberation Movement in Iowa. It's not Black Lives Matter, it's the Black Liberation Movement that has taken a big role in reinvigorating young people to be more engaged. And then from that, we've seen other smaller, but more tightly knit grassroots movements empowering young people to get out and use their voice. So I think it's essential. I don't see us doing it any other way except maybe through increased representation in our schools and our local government. But for us to even see that, I think it's going to take grassroots movements. I can't see any other way.
And I think we have to work together. So I think I remember when some of protests and things were happening, there was this disconnect that I'm hearing.
Yep.
There was huge disconnect between, I'm just gonna say, younger and seasoned folks, okay? I'm not gonna say younger and seasoned folks. I think there was this disconnect that happened, and somehow we've got to bridge that gap for the way that you go about wanting to see change and the way that I might go about seeing change looks different. And what's happening is those differences are actually dividing us even more, and then we're starting to go our own separate ways. Somehow that has to stop. We are stronger, and we all know this together when we're moving forward together. But I think that at that time, from what I noticed was, I'm like, they don't bother with us and you don't want to be bothered with them. Well, then what are we gonna do? Because we can't both sit one over here and one over there and say, okay, we're gonna make this happen to get it done. We collectively need the resources of each other to get this thing done. So I think somehow that gap needs to be bridged. I don't know how that happens. More talks at the table, whatever. I'm a talker, so y'all, I'll talk all day. Like, I'll sit at the table with anyone and be like, let's hash this out.
That's right.
But because I think that's where things happen. But we got to figure out what that looks like, because to me, that's what I've noticed, and both bring good things to the table. But for some reason, I just seen that division happen, and I think that both are doing great things. We've got to figure out how to bring that back together so we can get this work done.
Well, I think the at least in my experience, what the cause of that gap has been is a lack of communication. When I went to high school or middle school, I didn't have any Black leaders come up to me and be like, what do you think about what's going on in America? And I think this is the experience for a lot of young people, so we're really doing self-education. Since we have the internet, since we can look up anything with a couple click, and then we have the answer, we've been really empowering ourselves. But then I think that's causing the disconnect. We're not learning from our elders. So then when, I'm not speaking from my experience because I've learned better, but when an elder comes, well, I'm still kind of learning. My dad says, when an elder comes and says, oh, like, why are you doing your protests like this when you should be doing it like that? Like, where were you before? Like, why should I be listening to you when I've gotten here all by myself? And so I think by, again, having these conversations earlier, not waiting until people are 17, 18 to talk to them about voting, but talking to them about it when they're children even, right? When we talk about, oh, you want to see a change in the world? Like, when you're 18, go register to vote. When there's another Black person that's murdered by the police, going to your child and say, okay, here's how we're going to do this together, right? Instead of letting the young people, because we'll figure out a way, but we can learn a lot from y'all. That's what I've come to realize.
Well, I think mentoring people, and I think mentoring people is important too. I do think what happens is a lot of people, and these are just things I've observed. I'm an observer. I may not go directly and say things to people, but I'm an observer, and I've observed that people who are in power, who are more seasoned, sometimes there's no mentorship happening along the way. So then when it's time for you to exit out of that position, you're looking around and going, well, where are they at to come into place? Well, because you never took the time to start mentoring, I'm a proponent that I'm not going to do this work forever. So I need y'all to come along, and I need to reach out to y'all and say, hey, this is what I got going on, but I'm gonna show you how I do it. Make it work for you, but I need to start mentoring you to get into that. Because I keep telling folks in like 10 years, I'm done. And I'm done because it's time for me to exit and go on and do something else. You can call me on the phone, I can help you out, but like, it's time for you to step in. But what I've noticed in our community is that hasn't happened. So then we keep getting the same people who are in power doing the same things in our leaders, but now we're got this gap. So when they're 70 plus years old, still hanging on, well, they're hanging on because they didn't train nobody to come up behind them. I'm gonna go Bible here. It says train up people, your child in the way they should go. I believe that we should start training young people in the way they should go to give them some direction so that they can take over. I don't want to sit in a position of power forever. I want you to do it. I want you to be president. I want to support you. I want to share with you what I've learned. Not to tell you that you have to do it like me, but to know that this is how it's worked for me. Now let me learn from you and figure out how it's worked for you. And then you're probably gonna teach me something that I'm gonna implement in something, but at the same time, we're helping each other along the way.
Right.
That's what we need more of, and I think that's what's missing.
So, go ahead.
And I'm sure it's nice, because I just said it all. What you're talking about and what comes to mind with me are relationships. And, you know, I'm not seeing, there's that divide, I'm not seeing relationships being developed between the youth and the elders. And what comes with relationships is respect. You know, there's some things that are going on. Yeah, I mean, there's no relationship. How can we make it this far and you're not even respecting what we are saying or what we're doing? You don't have to do it. So I think that's
Amen.
Well, for those of you who are seasoned, I'm gonna drop an old school movie quote on you from a great philosophical movie called Boomerang. And what I'm gonna say is we got to coordinate. We got to coordinate. That is the big problem that we have. We have got to get these groups to talk to each other and to spend time with one another. I was there during the George Floyd protests of 2020. I was in the middle of those rooms where we had different groups who were trying to talk to one another. And there was such a clash. They're like, man, you people are old, you don't know what you're talking about, you don't know what you're doing. Well, you people are young, you don't know what you're talking about, you ain't got any connections. It's gotta be like, how do we extend each other grace? How do we extend each other space so that we stop and allow ideas to flow and say, how do we work together? And the other thing that we have to do whenever you're trying to coordinate with any different groups, because votership, once again, should be nonpartisan. We should just be working on how do we make sure that we register people and inform people. You know, the one thing that we have to make sure that we do is allow each other that space so that we can grow and learn from one another. And I think there's this impatience that happens with individuals to say, well, it's just my way or the highway. And for anybody who's ever been married or been in a relationship, you know that ain't gonna work. I mean, if anybody knows my wife, you know, if I tell her it's my way or the highway, I'm gonna have a frying pan on my forehead by 3 o'clock. So, but I think that that's probably the most important thing, is for youth to get together and for us to get together. And sometimes, you know, people say, well, where do we go to get youth? You know, where do we go? That's where we gotta turn to somebody and be like, you know, Aaron, sometimes it is difficult to go in places where youth are at, because that's not a space for someone like me. But for you to say, you know what, let's talk and let's coordinate, and let's find how we can find a mutual space that we can work at together. Because I would love to be able to go and talk to high school students, but once again, if I'm wandering around a high school trying to talk to people, I'll be in jail by 2:30. So I don't need it.
All right, so I appreciate this, you all, and it is very poignant. And one thing I hear a lot is humility, right? So grace, you have to have humility. And I think sometimes we struggle with that. I will tell you, this has been one of the best learning experiences for me this past year. Because again, I come in and I feel like I know a lot about a lot, but I do, I will own that. However, I don't know a lot about a lot. There's a whole lot I don't know. And they have helped me humble myself and sometimes just listen. Or their ability to understand different ways of communication. Where, you know, I'm about to call you, like that's what feels most comfortable for me. That's not how they communicate. And I have to grow and learn in ways that I'm not used to growing, right? And so there has to be humility on both sides and a willingness to grow together, right? How are we gonna learn together? But that's just that, I don't know how to do that, but it does, it takes us creating spaces like this to say, let's come together and let's sit down and try to tackle these issues collectively, not one over here and one over there. So let me move to our last question. So we're gonna switch this. What role can non-Black people play in helping mitigate anti-Blackness and racial inequities? So
Free
I'm gonna
topics.
say y'all, and then I'm gonna ask, I'm gonna open it up to the audience as well. I wanna hear from y'all too. You said what?
Free tacos, sorry.
Listen, I'm ignoring that. Who else has something to say? What are some, so again, the question is, what role can non-Black individuals play in helping mitigate anti-Blackness and racial inequities? Go ahead, John.
Well, one of the ways I have found most rewarding to be an ally is I've joined the NAACP.
Listen, I know, I've seen your face. I'm like, let's go.
And one of the things we're doing, we've just started, is to create a new civic engagement guide. And it's, the spark came from an old 1937 100-page booklet put out by the League of Women Voters. And it was written at a 5th grade level, but had so much detail from Des Moines, city government in Des Moines, county government, state government. So all the information, incredible amount of detail, but also written in a very easy to understand manner. The NAACP is partnering with many other organizations. We're still trying to get more people involved, and we've expanded that idea. So right now we're just trying to find out information for city councils for every city in Polk County, but then all the cities in the surrounding counties as well. But our priorities are the ones with the highest Black population, but we're trying to do all of them. But that's only the first, step, because we have these the city elections, the school board elections are this year. So we've got to get that done first, so we can have that information for people available. So, but it's gonna be a 2-year project, so please, contact me or the NAACP of Des Moines.
That's it. Appreciate that though, and that's the important piece, I think, is often for specifically our white allies and brothers and sisters, is understanding that we all play a role in this conversation, right? And they always say, we didn't get here on our own. I ain't literally and figuratively, right? We didn't get here on our own. And so we all play a role in ensuring that we're taking active measures to create greater equality or greater equity, right? And so everyone has a role in this. Anyone else has something they want to share with us?
I want to be quick about this, but, so show up, listen more than you talk, ask questions to clarify, admit you don't know things. That will bring you respect. And volunteer, come in and put in some elbow grease. Put in some time to help set up table tents and chairs for, Neighbors Day, or for an event at Drake University, or for Taste of the Junction. Show up. And then also, how can you help fund organizations that are doing the things that need to get done? Like voter registration. Don't just say, hey, I support you. I think you guys are great. Here's a proclamation. Show up and donate to these organizations that are doing this. Because I'll tell you, sometimes maybe $50 may not seem like a lot to you, but for an organization who's trying to do things, that means a lot. So show up, listen, ask questions, volunteer, and then donate.
That's good. It's very specific. Appreciate that. Dr.
This takes me back to a time when I had training on my job. And at that time, C.T. Vivian, that's what I'm saying.
Oh, yeah.
Oh, okay, I'm
Yeah.
glad you know about C.T.
Yeah,
Vivian.
I know C.T. Vivian.
C.T. Vivian marched with Martin Luther King. I like to say they were disciples of Martin Luther King. But in any march you see, C.T. Vivian was on one side, Ralph Abernathy on the front row. C.T. Vivian went throughout the country doing equity training. And in that training, he said, well, it was about urban potential. And he says, you have to know where you're at on the totem pole, whether we like it or not. You have to know where you're at on the totem pole if you're working together to get things done. So the totem pole, it all depends on, what sector you're in, but it's generally white men, white women, African-American women, and then the African-American man. Well, where are you? If you're below on that totem pole, no matter what you say or do, true or not, the persons above you are going to be believed, and they'll probably be the ones that get their way. So, saying that, what I think helps is when we speak out, when you see injustice, when you hear it, say something about it. So often we are in the company of individuals who are saying and doing things that may be racially derogatory. And we don't say anything. You might say, well, or let me go, whatever. No, speak to that situation. Excuse me. Can we talk about this? So if we have more people, I believe, that speaks to situations that are unfair, unjust, and derogatory in any kind of way, speak to it with, again, the humility come in. But if we do more of that, I think that helps it too. And I have seen it happen, and it makes a difference, because sometimes the person then shames their own self and said, oh, I guess you're right. I never should have said that. But had you not said something, and let's say in this case, it's a white person saying something derogatory about a minority, had another white person not said something to them, it may not have the same effect. And they'll think twice, maybe I should think about it. If the minority said, hey, I don't appreciate what you did or what you said, and the way you said it, oh, well, you never did. Maybe that's where they go, but they may not listen. So I just think that we need to speak to the situation. That's that honest conversation. Be bold with it, but be fair.
I think that we need to educate yourself. All the things that we're saying up here, you can go do a little Google search and educate yourself. Sometimes you might not have us here to give you all of the information, or other people. I think you need to educate yourself. I also think you need to get comfortable with being uncomfortable, because the things that we've experienced and we have lived through is not comfortable. So it's time for you to get comfortable with being uncomfortable. You're gonna have to be courageous, because a lot of these issues we're talking about are gonna require you to advocate for us. And you're gonna lose some people in the process. Rather it's a family member who don't like what you're saying, it's a coworker because you stopped them from, saying something at work. Like, just know that that's 9 times out of 10 gonna happen, but you're gonna have to be courageous. And you're gonna have to stop listening to the foolishness of others. We've got people who are giving misinformation on a daily, and you're gonna have to stop listening to that. And when you're educating yourself, you can say, oh yeah, that's not right. We've got people who are, and I've said this before, the not speaking the history thing is just driving me crazy, because it's lived American history. This is stuff that actually happened here in the United States. Let's get over it and make it better. And then also you have to remember, we're talking about human beings. I know we put the color on it, Black, white, Asian, whatever, but we are human beings. And I want you to ask yourself this every day. Do I want another human being to be treated in the manner in which individuals are saying other human beings are being treated? If that answer is no, you have an obligation to do something about it. If you don't want another human being treated that way, then I expect you to speak up. I expect you to show up, and I expect you to advocate, and I expect you to hold those policymakers or the hired help that we have temporarily. I expect you to do something with them. And it starts with your vote, but it goes back to us being human beings. That's what this is about. We get caught up in race and we're getting distracted with all of this. This is a human being issue. This is a human rights issue. And that's what we need to be thinking about. So I'm just asking you all to like, get over it and let's do something about it. Because I don't want to be talking about this in the next 10 years. None of us do. But we can change it now.
I think to add one last thing, how many of y'all are familiar with black codes? That's some nods. Well, I learned that the black codes were laws in which free black people would be forced to work for little to no pay. This was right after, or these existed before the end of the Civil War, but they were very prominent post-Civil War. I learned this from Mr. Hudson in my AP US history class. And so that was kind of, I was like, okay, Mr. Hudson, I learning about, I was learning something after slavery about black people. That's not Martin Luther King. I was taken aback. And then me and Mr. Hudson, we talked more and more, and then he was elected into city council. And so one day it was after a class, I went up to him, I asked him, hey, can I be your mentee? He was like, sure, I don't know what I'm doing yet, but sure. And honestly, he ended up showing me some of the things that are going on, especially in Valley Junction. I remember he had me scout out an incubator to help him make a decision about whether or not we wanted to keep it or if we wanted to make it a place for fire and EMS. And so that happened, and then we were also working on a project where we wanted to make a city student committee, and we're something that we're still working on. But then COVID happened, that kind of pushed back progress. But then, come a few years later, it's towards the fall of 2022. My little sister shoots me a text, and she's like, "Hey, did you see this DEI internship at the city of West Des Moines?" I was like, yeah, I did. Are you going to apply? She said, no, I can't. I don't want you to apply because I can't get it because I'm not in college. But if you're interested, I can't stop you from applying. And so I applied and I told Mr. Hudson, and Mr. Hudson was like, oh, okay. And then so I heard that him and Audrey had some conversations and stuff. And then here I am. And if I didn't have that relationship with Mr. Hudson, if he didn't take that time to not only use his position of power to educate me on my history that I wasn't even familiar with, that I think a lot of us kind of overlooked that short period of time between Jim Crow and civil rights, Jim Crow and the Civil War. But not only that, but then also take the time to mentor me and cultivate me to be a leader in my community. When I was thinking about how could I get out of Iowa, I don't think I would be here. And so I think really it's about using your positions of powers where historically Black people haven't been able to get into, right? Like we still very much see many teachers who aren't able to, many Black teachers who aren't able to find room in the Des Moines Metro. If you are in a position of power to educate the youth, if you're in a position of power to educate your coworkers, if you're in a position of power to find a young person who seems like, I don't know, they want to be president or they want to do something big, thank you. Use that position of power and really cultivate it in them. And yeah, that's my advice.
Yeah, that's great. That's great.
So I know some of you are tired, you have long days and stuff like that, and I think about my friends, Dwana and Michelle, who run amazing events and on very little energy. I think about Audrey herself, who works very, very hard, and at the end of the day, has got a thimble full of energy. And we're asking you to get out and volunteer and do more stuff. I just want to leave you with one quote from Mama Patterson during the 1955 bus boycott in Montgomery. At one point in time, this 63-year-old Black woman is walking home, and somebody pulls up next to her and says, Mom Patterson, don't you want to ride? You want to ride? She goes, no, I want to ride. By this time, the bus boycott had been going on for almost a year. This 63-year-old woman walking back and forth to work. They start to drive off and they're stopping. They're like, Mama Patterson, aren't you tired? And Mama Patterson drew herself up, looked right in the eye and said, you know what? My feet are tired, but my soul is rested. And that's what I want each one of you to think. You know what? Maybe I feel tired, but my soul is rested because I know there's work to do. There's truth to be told, and there are things that we need to fight for that go beyond just myself. I know each and every one of us who are activists in this room, we don't do this for any personal glory or anything, or maybe free tacos, but you know, we do this because this goes beyond us. And that's what you gotta think when you leave here and you volunteer and sign up to do something. My feet may be tired, my soul is rested, what more can I do?
That's right, thank you, that's right.
We only have about 5 minutes. Do we have any questions from the audience? Or any questions online?
How about, does anyone in the audience want to share anything that?
Yeah, because don't jump.
Sorry.
I'm about to give my 2 minutes real fast. No, well, maybe, because it may not be the same thing.
No.
Go ahead.
No, pretty much think the same. Go ahead.
So I have 2 things I want to share with you all, if no other questions. And again, I just think it's important. And I think, Aaron, you really got to this. I would say in my own lived experience in personal life, some of my greatest advocates and allies have been white, specifically men. And understanding the role that you play in helping cultivate leaders is so important. When you're at the top, you have a responsibility to reach back and pull others up. And so I will say, for my white men who are in this space, I need you all to reach back and pull somebody else up, right? And so that mentorship piece really is so important. And just recognizing the role you can play in helping really a young person, or just even an older person. It doesn't matter where you're at in your life, but really trying to help folks see another opportunity or reach an opportunity that they maybe didn't have a chance to. So that's really important. And that's easy. It's just mentorship. Cultivate other leaders in your spaces. The other, and I think I forgot my other one. I forgot. It don't matter. Must not be that important. Yes.
Okay, it's a twofold question. And it's for, who's the historian on the panel?
I'm gonna rule it out for now. Yes.
Okay. Can you remind us, or help us understand, what is Juneteenth? And then I have a follow-up question. And the reason why I'm posing this question is because I've seen, in the last 2 weeks, I've seen dozens of explanations of what it is. And a lot of modifications in the definition. So just help us or remind us, what is Juneteenth? And I have a follow-up question.
Okay, so not to go too far into it, but on June 19th, at the end of the Civil War, is finally when those who were enslaved in the state of Texas were finally informed of emancipation. Now, this took place before the 13th Amendment that formally, constitutionally freed all slaves in the United States of America. So that's when they finally were informed that they were emancipated.
And that was, can I just add a
Yeah,
little
you're
bit
right.
to that, please? And so the Emancipation Proclamation was really written in that September of 1862. It was approved in January 1st of 1863. It took 2.5 years later for that information to get to the 250,000 enslaved in Texas, in Galveston, Texas, of their freedom. And that message was brought forth by General Gordon Granger, who gets a lot of the credit, but there were also Black troops that came alongside of him as well to provide that message to the enslaved in Galveston, Texas. So really what you're celebrating is what is kind of the precursor to the 13th Amendment that comes, of course, later. But for me, being a person that has been general chairperson now of Juneteenth for the last 8 years, that's the history that I give. There's still more history that I would like to share. That's kind of the short and sweet of it. But for me, our celebration is about history, about those who have contributed to history, about those who are helping us have a better history. But I do know that Juneteenth means different things to different organizations and different people, and it gets touted and shared in many different ways. But just to answer your question, I think, Al, what you said, and just adding to it, that's what the National Foundation of Juneteenth, that's what they're talking about, is what happened there in Galveston, Texas, 2.5 years later after the Emancipation Proclamation.
Thank you. And that really segues into my secondary question, which is, why 200 years? Why did it take, I'm not 200, why 2
2
years?
years.
Why did it take 2 years?
Because at that point in time, when you look at in 1863, when the Emancipation Proclamation was ratified, we were still within the depths of the Civil War. And the way that when the Emancipation Proclamation was written by Abraham Lincoln, it was that it didn't necessarily free all slaves, it freed all slaves who were in the state of rebellion. And at that point,
In the Union States, right? In the Union.
yeah, no,
Which back then, the South had.
it freed the slaves who were in rebellion states. Yeah, and so it was just difficult then to pretty much get messengers out west into Texas. Because really, when you take a look at the Mississippi River, that was actually where some of the most intense fighting happened in the West when we talk about the Civil War itself. So being able to go beyond the Mississippi River was a little bit difficult just because, you know, we look at places like, say, Tennessee, Mississippi, Louisiana, even parts of, you know, Missouri, there was extraordinarily intense fighting there. And then instead of driving west into Texas, Union forces then drove east in order to be able to help crush the rebellion. So the primary objective was, let's crush this rebellion, then we can make sure that the word gets spread and gets sent out to people. And unfortunately, that takes a bit of time.
And even if they didn't hear it many times, stakeholders would say, that's a lie.
Yeah,
So if they even happen to hear it somehow, that's not true.
right.
To work, so.
Yeah, it took the federal forces, showing up, being able to actually
Enforce it.
Yeah, no, I just, I know we're getting towards the end here. I just want to say a couple things. First of all, Audrey, thank you for helping put this together, and to the Historical Society for hosting, to our panel for being here and sharing your perspective. So much, like you said, I think earlier, being comfortable with being uncomfortable, and also, you know, building relationships and talking about things and finding commonalities. It's a really good pathway. And so I appreciated, you know, the perspective you have. I also want you to know, in the city of West Des Moines, we're trying to do so many great things in a lot of different spaces. That's why we have Audrey and, you know, building out what we're doing in the community. So just know that insofar as it relates to West Des Moines, and obviously we've had some recent things here with the Long family, but that's just a small example. It's an important one, but it's an example of what we're trying to do. And so if there are ideas or thoughts or feedback, we're all ears. And so I wanted to share that before we end.
And I'm sure Matt would also agree that it's wonderful to have Audrey. And while this is your role in the city, it is not exclusively your role in the city. I know that Matt and I agree that
I can't do all this.
yeah, we are here as well. So it is our job as well, even if it's your title, it's our job as well. So I want to say thank you.
It's great to hear that, because I'm going to be talking to you two specifically about something I want to do on September 19th.
My God.
Also, I want to hear about those squares and see if there's any squares blocks in West Des Moines. I want to hear about that.
Yeah.
So really quick, I wanted to give a big shout out, but also encourage you all. That was my second thing, was the biggest thing. Dr. Vicky, why did I lose that? So we talk about the history and preserving the history. I know you talked about your sister Michelle Long, who has been leading the Taste of the Junction now for, it's going to what, 11 years? Let me tell y'all, and I've been in West Des Moines now for a year and a half, and I attended last year. That was by far, not to disparage anyone else, any other program or even my own programs, that was the best program I've been to date. To see the community show up that Friday night for the Junction Speaks, and watching people tell their stories of connection and how we all live together and how we supported each other. And she has frames of different families and their heritage and their legacy, and it is moving. And I will encourage every person in this room to show up. The date, do you have the dates?
Labor Day weekend, September 1st and 2nd.
Thank you. I'm gonna encourage y'all to show up. That is an incredible experience to watch our history come to life. We are historical beings, so that's really important. And the third, I would add, you all, look where we're at having this conversation. And that's not lost. So I thank you, Gail, and the West Des Moines Historical Society for pushing to preserve the history of the Jordan House. You know, we talk about what does allyship or advocacy look like? Look at you, what's around you, right? This is it. And again, we don't know all the complexity and the pieces of the story, there's many more. But I will say, James Jordan stood when a lot of people wouldn't. And so when John Brown was coming through with freedom seekers, he was one of the only ones who said, I will allow you all to stay within my area and territory. When others said, we won't, we ain't doing it, right? And we're willing to let people die who are seeking their own freedom. That's our history here in West Des Moines. That's our history of Valley Junction, right? We have to work to preserve that history. And again, that couldn't be possible without all of us saying this is a part of our shared humanity. So I encourage you all, just keep doing good work, get involved, stay engaged. There are many ways to do this beyond the month of June or Juneteenth, right? And so advocacy doesn't live only in 1 month. Keep pushing forward, and thank you so much to our panelists. Let's give them a round of applause.
And if I could just say, before we close, I personally would like to say to the city of West Des Moines that's being represented here tonight, Greg, Matt, Audrey, the work that you guys are doing, and I'm trying not to get emotional, it's important to be at the table. Because we've been pushing and tugging for a lot of things in West Des Moines for a long time. We're 7 generations in, and being at the table has made a difference. So Matt, you sitting in your space, Greg, you've been in your space and speaking truth to power, and Audrey coming in, and I could go, Renee, when she got on the council, and it's like, it's so important to be at the table. And then you all are giving others permission to do the same. And I know you're putting your careers on the line. You know, there's a lot of things on the line when you choose to speak up and speak truth to power. So I want to applaud you, and I support, and I'm just so proud to see what West Des Moines is doing. And yeah, we do got a long way to go, but I'm living to see the proof of being at the table. Because we've been pushing for a lot of things, and until we get the right people in the right rooms at the right table, because you guys can be on the council, but we need Audrey on the staff, and we need people in different spaces and committees to make things happen. So I just want to thank everyone in here for being the change agents and for being at the table and putting yourself on the line to make progress. Some of it we're not going to see because we're living off the graces of what people have done for us that they couldn't see. So the things that we're doing, we may not see, but we're going to pave the road for the people behind us. So I just want to thank everyone that's in this room that's making a difference.
If y'all don't know what's out on that table, I tell you, Miss Michelle Long showed up. Okay, so we do have some wonderful delicacies, some peach cobbler cookies that are on the table. You can't eat in here. That's okay, but you can take it home and eat it and enjoy it in the car if you so choose. So thank you so much for showing up. Have a wonderful evening. We'll see you all again soon. Rob. Forever.
Great.
See you again.